Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, June 5th. My name is Heather Kraus, and I am very, very happy to see you all. It makes my day, makes my whole week when I get to hang out with you folks at Talking Data Equity. I missed you last week. I was on a plane, and so I didn't get to come. So, Talking Data Equity, for those of you who are just joining us for the first time ever, welcome. Talking Data Equity is a pretty close to weekly drop-in event that We All Count hosts. And the idea behind Talking Data Equity is that we want every single Friday to be different. But what they have in common is that we either get together as a community and talk about a specific topic or share specific methodologies, or we have guest speakers who are going to talk to us about their experiences and tell us their stories. And so the content is always something to do with data equity. And the purpose is always to help you learn new things and most importantly, to remind you that you are not alone. There is a whole data equity community across sectors, across countries, and wherever you are, even if you are maybe the only person on your team or in your organization doing this type of work, you are definitely not alone. And we are recording today, and the reason we record is so that we can share. Oh, that didn't work. I'm going to put a new link in the chat in just a second. But we record so we can share with the folks who want to learn and be part of the community, but just can't come at this exact time. And we share the recordings and all the resources in our data equity community forum, which is a free public good. You can go there anytime to ask questions, share resources, and watch Talking Data Equity videos. And the other thing I will tell you is I'll put a link in the chat in just a moment that lets you know where you can go to the Talking Data Equity website to check who our special guests are each week or what topics we're going to cover. Okay, so the housekeeping, I'm going to introduce the special guest right now. Then after I do that, I'm going to turn the screen and the mic over to her. And while she's sharing her stories, we're going to ask that you keep your microphone turned off. You can feel free to ask questions and share reflections and have conversations in the Zoom chat. But we're going to ask you to keep your microphone off at the beginning. And then if there is time, we will have a live in the room Q&A, which is always a lot of fun. Okay, so let me introduce you to a super cool person who I'm very grateful made the time on a Friday night, her time zone, to join us today. Edafe Onerhime designs data and AI architectures for organizations where the stakes are high, like financial services, international aid, and regulated sectors. And these are all places where the stakes are high. She's been doing this for over 30 years. She does data engineering at the ground level. She has shaped United Kingdom data policy at the government level. And yes, they cite her in the UK Parliament. You can see it on YouTube if you want. Some of her recent really cool work is JP Morgan Chase. She led data architecture governance, as was a contributing member of the firm's responsible AI working group. Also, as the head of data at the UK Foreign Office, she was responsible for internal data and open data for transparency and accountability. And at Royal London, she led enterprise data architecture across insurance, pensions, and investments. That means over 181 billion pounds of assets under management. So she's super cool. She knows what to do when the stakes are high. She loves to stay hands-on. She built data standards that have been adopted by the World Bank and the Open Data Institute. She's currently writing a book called Standards, the Hidden Architecture of Transformation, which we will all buy the very moment it's available for pre-order. And she believes that trust is not a soft concept or a wishy-washy term. Trust is built or lost by every architecture decision, every standard, and every governance choice. You can see why she's so close to my heart, speaking all of our values into being. Let me turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you so much, Heather. That was a lovely introduction. Hello, everyone from Scotland. It's been a long week. I'm on my sixth week in my new job, so I am very much a new girl. And yeah, there's been a lot of learning, but I do enjoy the learning part of new roles because nobody cares that you're badgering them with questions when you're new. So I take the time to always pick up as much as I can and try and make the place a little bit better. So let me share my screen so we can get started. And my talks, because I'm Nigerian, so my talks are very much interactive. So please do pop some comments in the chat. I may not be able to see them straight away because I'm still trying to figure out how I can work the different having only one screen. But do put them in the chat now. I'll pick those up over time. But let's get started. It looks like there is a chat button. Excellent. I can see it. Okay, we're good. Excellent. So, bit interactive. I don't come and do talks to just talk at you because that's why I have a wife, that's her job. But I like to hear what you're thinking because just because I'm an expert in one area, I'm not an expert in every area, right? So for me, one of the joys of working with data is the ability to work with so many different practitioners from different areas and learn from what they do and make my practice better. So I'm always super keen to hear what you're thinking. So hit me up in the chat, and you can disagree with me. You don't have to agree with me. That's the thing, right? I'm not like I said, I don't have everyone's context, so that's super important. So as always, it's tradition in my talks now. I'm going to keep myself a good time to give you time for questions. So expect like about half an hour, maybe a little bit less, just because I really want to hear what you're thinking. So I always start my talks with a question. When did you last feel like a number? So pop in the chat, tell me when you last felt like a number. Whatever that means to you, there's no right answers. I just want to know when you were last made to feel like a number, or when you last felt like a number. And if you are willing to share, you can add the circumstances, you don't have to. I just think it's good to, let's start with that, right? Because we're talking about trust. So hit me up in the chat and let's get started. And Heather's introduced me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this bit. Excuse me, I do also have a bit of a cold, but you can ignore that. Essentially, I put this slide in because I always want to ensure people realize I'm not talking about anything to do with my employers or any of the organizations I volunteer with. So I volunteer, for example, as an ambassador for Open UK in the UK, because for me, the open industry, the open sector, the open movement was where I started, whether that's open source, open data, open government. That for me is where I started what I think of as the leadership period of my career. So I'm always wanting to stay quite close to that. I also am a steward for Data Tech and Black Communities, which is currently working on a project on Black AI voices. And really, what we're saying is, look, we can't ignore the fact that AI is changing so many things in our communities, in our society, in our work. But what does it mean to us as the Black community, a minority group in the UK? What does that mean to us? Do people even understand AI? So one of the things we're doing, for example, is creating primers to help people really understand what AI is, right? Instead of thinking it's magic. There was a really interesting sketch in the UK, which became a bit of a meme. Like computer says no, and that kind of thing was really about automation, and I think of that quite often. So what I do is I design data and AI architectures for organizations, as Heather said, where the stakes are high. But I actually have a motto, and that's data design and culture. So from my experience, data is impacted by design because people design data. It's not autonomous. It didn't just come out of the ether fully formed, like I think is Aphrodite. I can't remember my Greek mythology. It didn't just spring from her father's head. This is actually something that people decide. There's a decision there. And the culture that people are in kind of impacts the data that we collect, right? So that's why data is impacted by design or shaped by design, but it reflects culture. I used to work in central government, and what I found was that the director generals, people didn't say, I work in this department, they say, I work for this director general. And that's where the silos of the data, interestingly enough, could be found. So that's why I really like keeping those three concepts in mind whenever I join an organization. But my guiding principle is that high quality data is usable, it's useful, and it's put into use. Anything else is just hoarding, and it's really a waste of your storage space. And then the final thing, I'm not going to go into it here because I do this usually do this at every talk, but I thought today I might start slightly differently. Is I usually ask people what is data, but I want you to understand what I consider data, even if you don't agree with me. Most people will say numbers, some people will talk about knowledge, some people will talk about wisdom and that whole thing, the data, knowledge, information, wisdom tree. And I usually disappoint them by telling them that no, they're all wrong. Data is digital, it isn't numbers. Data essentially is anything that we record, is any recording of any marks that we make. And that's very abstract, but let me break it down a little bit more for you. From a perspective of someone who works in data, everything is data, right? There is no restrictions on me using data, whether it's in the cyberspace, which means that documents are data, file structures are data. This is all data. We can extract that if the business or the organization cares enough about it to want to record it. So the recording is the important thing, not the media. But also in meat space, as I like to call in real life, if you've been on IRC as a person of my age, IRL, data is on paper. It's marks we make on paper, right? Data is only really meaningful to us. It's not meaningful to machines. It's only meaningful to humans. We are pattern and context recognition machines. We see patterns. That's why we see bunnies in clouds. But we also have context. If I wrote 24-12-2026, most of you will say that's a date. But a computer doesn't know that. So we have to give it context. And that's where you get AI. So there you go. All my interests have all kind of come together into one. So from the perspective of someone with data, someone who works in data, everything is on the table. So when you say documents, no difference to me. I can analyze, I can process, I can manipulate anything that I can get a recording of. Great. So hopefully we're on the same page, even if you don't agree with me. And I just looked in the chat to see that when you apply for a job, yes, there is AI screening on a lot of jobs. I have been turned down for lots of jobs, and then the CEO or CTO has contacted me and said, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize." And that's because I have a very non-standard CV, so I don't meet the patterns that is looking for. On a flight like that, trying to get a prescription. Yes, welcome to my world. I actually take a piece of paper now to the clinic and hand it to them. That's how old fashioned I've had to go because they lose my medication all the time. I get half of it or whatever. So now I take a piece of paper and I drop it off and I know I'll get what I need. Okay, great. So we'll get started. Like I said, I want to keep this to about half an hour. But let's talk about the two things that I think are super important for today, and that's trust and decisions. Now, this is a lovely little cloud I've done. Everything on the, I have to work it out because I don't know directions. On the left is about trust, and everything on the right is about decisions. And I want you to really pay attention to the words that are closest to trust. So these are just synonyms. I just use the Merriam-Webster dictionary. So if you see any American spellings, that's why. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't put American spellings in my work, but sometimes that happens. So trust, when we say trust, we really are talking about these things: openness, reliability, honesty, accountability, fairness, that feeling of being safe, integrity, respect, etc. And then when we're talking about decisions, and I'll come to why I included decisions, we're talking about things like choice, judgment, intent, resolution, direction, action. So again, remember I talked about the fact that data is a choice. Someone chooses the fields to collect, chooses the length of information that that field is going to contain, chooses. People are making decisions. Whether it's a decision to collect or use data, it's usually a person's in the loop at some point. So I want you to just keep that at the back of your mind as we kind of proceed, because I really want you to have an idea about why I'm talking about these two things and how they come together. I will bring them together. Don't worry, you don't have to guess. That's coming next. But first, let's talk about what trust is. Now, John Gottman, I hope I pronounced his name correctly, he actually is a relationship advice person, which is why I found his work really fascinating. So when Heather got in touch with me, I do a lot of research for my talks, and part of the reason I like doing talks is it forces me to do research, right? So I did a lot of research and about trust, and I did research about decision making. I really wanted to kind of understand a little bit more about these. It just helps me to kind of give you a better experience. So someone says John Gottman's the GOAT. Yes, trust is central to what makes human communities work. And I love that quote so much that I've put it here. So trust is a feeling, but it's a feeling that's kind of necessary because of all those words we saw before, right? Being able to kind of rely on people to feel safe, to that someone's reliable, all that stuff is a feeling, but it's an important feeling, right? I remember when I first discovered that the stock market doesn't actually run off numbers, it runs off feelings. And I was like, oh, that was unexpected because I just did not think that was how the stock market worked. And then when I started working in JP Morgan, I was like, sentiment, really? Anyway, we're not going to get into that because I'll rant. So then decisions, I quoting Heather here, a data project is pretty much a series of incredibly important choices. I may have paraphrased a little bit to get it in the word count, but that is, I thought, very important to remember. It's a series of choices. It's not autonomous. The computer did not say no. It was the human in the design that made the computer say no. Okay. So if you do want to understand what I mean by the computer saying says no, just go to YouTube and then look it up. It hasn't aged well. Let's put it this way. Not aged well because there's some blackface and some other stuff. But anyway, just computer says no is a good meme. So those are really important to bear in mind. The data projects make a lot of decisions and they affect people. And this is how we're gonna let's do the lovely Venn diagram. So what I was thinking about, because I'm neurodivergent, so I always like to do my research first and put everything together and then look at it from several angles. And I noticed that there are 4 words that crossed across all 3 things, right? All 3 of my special interests: representation, power, participation, and voice. So that's how these 3 things come together. Data can affect trust because well, let's come to the example because and I'm going to give you a warning before I do anything that I think might be a bit uncomfortable. But data can affect people's ability to trust you as an organization. And in this case, I'm talking about clients. Because I work in financial services, clients are really the be all and end all in financial services. But when I say a client, I really mean people because everybody is kind of a client of financial services. If you have a bank account, you're a client. They might call you a customer, but as far as our regulator in the UK is concerned, you're a client. Or a consumer, really depends on who's doing the talking, but really they're the same thing. What the regulator is saying is that, you need to treat these people better. And there's some interesting things I'll come to later. But for clients to stay with you, they require to to be able to trust you. And we're looking at things like reliability, safety, predictability, faithfulness. Yeah, maybe not so much in financial services, but trust is important. If you don't trust your bank, you're probably not going to stay with them. If you're very wealthy, you really want to be able to trust your advisor. If not, you're not going to stay with them, right? So it's not just a case of it being about a socially appropriate or moral good. For financial organizations and regulated sectors, it's a necessity, right? And there's a reason I'm emphasizing that. It's not because I don't believe in the social good or the moral good, but because as anyone who's worked in a equity or governance role knows, it's incredibly hard to get people to care about that when they're thinking about the bottom line. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to show them that their bottom line, this is affected by this thing that they don't care about, and bring up examples of how they can change that. And even if it means I have to apply the psychological reframing, ultimately I'm always looking for people to get the best out of data, right? That's always my intention, so that it serves them and doesn't hinder them. And then we go to, where does trust and decisions overlap? We're talking integrity, honesty, and legitimacy of your decisions that affect trusts. For example, if you found out that the leader of your country had only decided to do a high speed rail because he thought that would be a great legacy for him, you might not trust him as much as if you thought he did it because he genuinely thought that the country would be improved. I'm talking about the UK. It costs a lot of money. We still don't have high speed rail, right? And then I found out that he only said yes because he wanted a legacy. And again, it's one of those things that you think, what a decision to make. I'm not even going to talk about the Scottish government whole fraud thing because that's still going on and I'd probably get in trouble. So let's ignore that. But I'm just trying to show that trust is important, and we can question decision making, which means that our trust can kind of power down. And then finally, data. So I have used the synonyms in the dictionary. So it's not necessarily that I believe that data means measurement, collection, evidence, and rigor, but that's what it focuses on. I agree with some of it. The measurements and the collection, definitely. Evidence, maybe not, but it's close enough. So let's say, for example, how do they intersect? So trust and data, you may not see it at the bottom. I don't know if it's cut off, but data is the bottom circle. Trust and data, you're talking about credibility, consistency, and transparency. So that's, for me, super important. And even in the UK, which I guess is better than some places for transparency and consistency. It's certainly something we still talk about, even though we're not as big on open data as we used to be. So that's a thing. And then consequence, ownership and accountability is where data and decision making cross over. Then when you look at the intersection of the three, you get representation, power, participation, and voice. And I'll be touching on some of these over the next few minutes as we continue to this journey. And as always, do let me know what you're thinking in the chat. Yesterday, when one typo on my ID locked me out of all work systems, I have been there. So yes, I get you. So now let's look at. It's not just me saying that in financial services, unregulated sectors, that data must be fair and functional. So I know these are big institutions, but hey, I wanted to make sure that we got representation from everywhere. So I went to have a look at what the OECD, the WEF, and the FCA, which is a regulator in the UK, what are they saying about trust and data equity? And it was really interesting for me because I've not had Heather not been in touch with me, I probably wouldn't have even had a look at this. So I was really interested in seeing, hey, what are these people actually saying about data equity? So I found these related papers, and the OECD published in 2015 a talk about data-driven innovation. It's a little bit old now, but the key thing I took away from that is that big data, which we don't even talk about big data anymore. It's like that's old school, that's the old fashioned, that's gone. we're onto AI now, or we're onto large language models. But when that was a big thing, it was that big data drives growth, but risks concentration, inequality, and a new digital divide if unchecked. So that is, yes, top marks to the OECD for that. It's true because if you're not in the data, you don't exist, right? So if nobody's collecting data about you, which people don't really want data about them collected, but at this top level decision making, what we don't see doesn't get any kind of support or help, right? So that's important. That's where we get the representation of my last slide. Then the WF in September 2024 published a paper about advancing data equity, and they talked about data harms people when it's biased, inaccessible, or it ignores whose it is. It's a kind of an awkward way of saying that if you ignore the person who you collected the data about, then it's a bit of a problem. That's what the WF, which World Economic Forum, really thinking about equity, I was kind of surprised. But yes, there is a harm. And there's even more of a harm now that we have AI, or as I like to call it, automated decision making. Because I feel like when we say artificial intelligence, we kind of minimize what it actually does. But automated decision making for me is great because it kind of reemphasizes that we are using something that is not human to make decisions. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, we use dogs to find people. Non-human intelligence is not bad, and there are, but it's, I guess it's non-biological. We're asking sand to make decisions. We need to be doing that a little bit more carefully, right? So that's a Terry Pratchett thing about teaching sand to think. So, I love Terry Pratchett, so maybe go look him up. He has a lot to say about a lot of things philosophically that I think are very interesting. I may even do a Terry Pratchett tech talk at one point if anyone will sort of turn up to that. Then the FCA. The FCA this year, actually in the UK, we have a very interesting system that I don't know if you've got in Canada. We've had open banking for a really long time. And open banking means that I can switch banking providers really easily. And they're trying to bring that same open banking thing to the rest of the financial sector. So they've got this roadmap, and what they were trying to do is minimize friction. So they're trying to apply it to mortgages, to loans, to really make both your data and your finance, your financial services portable. So it's surprisingly really good, and it's a tiny team that's made it. I've evaluated several times. I'm very impressed with how they've done it. They've had to really bully people, banks mostly, into doing this work because they don't want to, because they don't make it easier for you to move your money. So, excuse me. So we have data sharing unlocks growth, but only if consumers trust it and inclusion comes first. And I'm like, yeah, yes, you're speaking my language. And yes, the Venn diagram, the bottom of the circle was data. I think it might got cut off on my screen. So all of this is to say that I and you are not the only people thinking about data equity. But like the open banking team found in the UK, sometimes we have to reframe to push people into doing the right thing. Basically, that's what I mean. People don't always want to do the right thing, and sometimes that's why we have to get the legislative boots, the regulatory boots, social pressure, etc., to do the right thing. And sometimes it's the small things, and that's actually what I'm going to talk to you about today, because I don't really come into these talks to tell you to go and start a revolution, right? But I do come here to talk to you about the little things you can do, so you don't feel overwhelmed, and you can make a small change, which is better than nothing, as far as I'm concerned. Every little helps, which is a slogan for a supermarket. So, don't use it, you might get copyright strike. So let's talk about the erosion of trust, because that's really what I want to talk about, how data erodes trust, or rather poor quality data erodes trust. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about AI or not, they're all using the same data systems. So someone once told me, I don't know if it's a real saying or if they just made it up, but hopefully you can let me know, that trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback, which I've always liked. And that's where I've kind of coined this from, that the erosion of trust is quiet, the cost is not. And where that comes in is when, the little things, the little cuts that make you think, you know, I'm going to change banks, or I'm going to get a different credit card, or in my case, I'm never going to use a particular UK internet provider ever again, no matter how good their deals are, just because I can't trust them to keep my service up, right? There's just one too many times with too many straws that broke the camel's back. So here I've tried to like explain that, and thankfully you've all kind of given me very good examples. You get this start off in a high trust situation. Things like getting the name wrong. I've gone to hotels, I'd be called Mr. Onerhime, and I'm like, yeah, no. No, I'm not a man. And that just goes to show you that, you haven't even sort of verified my details. You can clearly see that I'm not a man. When you get inconsistent treatment because of, let's say, AI or algorithms, losing trust. When you miss a flag, in financial services, we have this concept of vulnerable clients. It's super important. And vulnerability is not just things like age or mental health. There's like lots of, I'm not going to cover it today, but there's lots of different criteria about vulnerability. And once again, our regulators, oops, go back. Our regulators had to force companies to manage vulnerability better, right? Brilliant. So now they manage vulnerability better, because before, vulnerable customers would have just fallen through the cracks. Now, if I try and send money to someone, I get all sorts of warnings like, hey, make sure this person is not trying to scam you. Do you know them? They say they're your child, but is it really, And some people, oh, that's annoying. But I'm like, no, that's good, because you're introducing friction at the right time. That is a good use of friction, right? That is good friction, because then the person can't turn around and say, oh, but I had no idea. You'd be surprised how many people say that. So what we want to do is we want to really help people at the time they need it most, whether that means, temporary vulnerability because you're sick, or permanent vulnerability because you're elderly or you have dementia. We need to have those processes in place. And it's important that the data also helps us to recognize and not miss those flags. And Daniel Kahneman, who's again is another awesome writer, Thinking Fast and Slow, he did a talk which I loved. Clients who have regrets will often fire their advisors. So again, whether that means switching banks, you know, again, he's talking about trust and decision making. And then obviously in financial services, the biggie is the wrong product. In fact, I think I got like money back. I didn't even know I'd been missold a product. It was a whole PPI thing we did in the UK, and I got money back, and I was like, oh, cool. Because I'd been missold a product. It wasn't actually right for me. And this is the sort of thing that financial services, the regulator, is really tightening the screws. So you'll find that, we're chipping away at people's trust, and then they're gone. And then I also talked about this earlier, that if you're not in the data, you don't exist. So how do you know someone's vulnerable? How do you know you sold them the wrong product? How do you know you're not making an assumption on your clients if your data is so poor, right? And this is where I kind of reframe the governance and equity argument. And I don't even mention governance and equity, but say you will lose clients or have lost clients. You can demonstrate it through customer complaints, because we have to collect them. So that's why I like working in regulated sectors. The things we have to collect means my job is much easier to persuade people to do the right thing. And that's one of the ways that we get people across that line of reluctance of saying, no, we need to focus on the bottom line. The client is the bottom line. There's no bottom line without clients, right? So I want to talk about 3 things I think you can do. Hopefully I've given you the argument of why it's important, right? Why you should do it. Hopefully I'm preaching to the converted, but then I'm not going to leave you with nothing and go, right, go forth. I do want to leave you with the 3 kind of really things that I've tried and tested and found to work. Even in places like JP Morgan, where everyone's like either vying for promotion or, doing things, everybody has to, the regulator affects all of us. So everyone has to think about these things. So I'm quite happy to find that the Responsible AI Forum was one of those things that they did that I thought, yes, this is good. This is us being responsible and this is us kind of living our values. So define. Who are you talking? Who are you actually talking about? Are they in your data? Right? So I'm a big fan of putting a thing up on the screen because people talk in the abstract, it's easy to get confused. It's easy to miss things out. If you have things up and you're looking at them together and they look wrong, you're more likely to fix them. So define is my first step. Then decide what choices are you making? Are they documented? Because I'm gonna tell you this: there's so many places I've worked that have not documented anything. They rely on people's memory. I can't rely on my memory. I can't remember what I had for breakfast. So for you to say that we should make a decision and not write down why we made that decision, yeah, good luck in 6 months when that person's been made redundant, trying to understand exactly what it was, So it's a simple step. Document things and understand the choices you're making. It's not really that hard, but you'll be surprised how many people would prefer to talk in the abstract than to say, okay, let's pull up the data, let's get an analysis and see what we're talking about, right? That's, oh no, I already know. Let's just make this decision. And then 6 months later, oh no, and I've been doing this for 30 years. So there have been lots of oh no's in my career. And then you get to the point you're just like, yeah, maybe we should have written that down. But that's one thing you can do. And also, there's that thing about covering yourself. It's not the reason I'm saying you should write things down, but there's a reason people send emails. It's because if you're in a low trust environment, covering yourself by saying, this is what we discussed in the meeting. Although in these days, a lot of meetings get recorded, so you don't have to cover yourself with that because it's there. But documenting things is super helpful. I mean, I look back sometimes and think, why did I do that? But again, it's written down. So finally, distribute. Who gets the output? Does it reach the person it's about? Now, I'm not saying that you always have to send decisions you make inside of your company to your clients, but this is where you go and examine things like your privacy notices, right? And that kind of thing, because at least in the UK, if you're changing the way you use people's data, you're supposed to tell them because either it's in your contract. We have lots of different, I'm sure lots of Europeans have this as well, because we all have the same Data Protection Act, I think very, very similar. But it's making sure those people understand what's changed. I also find a lot of companies go, oh, but we don't have really good data on our clients. I find that people are more kind of open to maybe, yes, changing and updating their data if they can see why, they can see the benefit to them. So that's the three things I think you can try. And I want to leave you with a couple of things. So then on to questions. Automated decisions. I know I just said this, but automated decisions equals automated inequity at scale or automated trust at scale. I'm trying to put a balance. I usually just don't put the second bit, but I'm trying to put a balance because yes, you can with good data get people to trust you with automation, but you have to be super careful with it. So just remember that the SANs we've taught to think works faster than our human meatbag brains. So when you're doing any kind of thing, remember it will be faster. So maybe I can make 25 mistakes, AI can make probably 2,500 in that same time. So you need to be super careful with that. And then my final takeaway for you is two questions to take away along with those three options. Whose experience are you assuming and whose are you erasing? So that's something you can take away and think about whenever you're working on any I want to say data project, but in reality, any project, because there's very few projects you don't collect data. So whenever you're doing anything, you can think about that. And that for me is very client-centric thinking. You're thinking about the people that you're impacting, and you're not assuming what they want. And hopefully that makes you more successful. And that hopefully will get you to where you want to go next, because the answers to those questions will be in how your clients feel, how they experience your organization. And my final slide, I'll leave this up, but final slide is that clients don't read your data, they feel it, which means how they feel is a measure of how good your data is. If you have a lot of complaints, I'm going to say go sort out your data, right? That's really helpful. So I'll leave this up, but I will make the screen larger so I can see all your lovely faces if you've got your camera on, and I can see the chat. And yeah, please do ask me questions. This is just my second talk of 2026. I usually do loads of talks in a year, but I decided since I'm writing a book, I will be a little bit more work-life balanced. So this is my second talk of the year, and I'm always really interested in what people take away from it. I've got Carrie. I appreciate explicitly asking who we are racing. I think the first question is sometimes asked, but the hard second one isn't. Very true. And as a lesbian, I am very conscious of being erased constantly. So I'm always like, are you collecting? I mean, today I was asking about, do we collect sexuality? And someone was like, no. I said, but can you infer it from the person partner? Well, probably yes. So over to everyone in the chat. What would you like to ask me?
Yeah, thank you so much. This talk is amazing. I've been getting a ton of direct messages in the chat of just people, crying with relief that somebody with your exposure to like these high level, seemingly like, bastions of hard data, the financial system and the regulatory system that also has an actual equity perspective with some tips on how to do that. And it is so fabulous. And I know that it is late Friday night, and we're so grateful that you fit us into your work-life balance. And we also all want to come to your Terry Pratchett and technical philosophy talk. So make sure you let me know when that is. Uh, but if there is people in the room that want to ask a question live, this is your chance to do this. Of course, we will put the recording into the forum so you can keep watching it or refer your friends to it. But if you are live and you want to simply turn your microphone on, this is your chance to go ahead and do that. We would love to hear from you. And while you decide, I'm going to look through the chat and see if is there any guidance tool literature which offers ways to analyze the source of data from an AI, LLM, or machine learning for bias? Is there any guidance tool or literature which offers ways to analyze the source of data or the output from AI and LLM? So those are two really different questions.
Yeah, there are tools that do attempt to assess the equity of data. Analyzing the source data is it's like a whole cottage industry, especially when you find out that AI is kind of really low tech. Um, for example, AI relies a lot on categorization, and a lot of that happens in countries with low wages because you're going to have to categorize like rather a lot for your large language models to work. And nobody is paying Western wages for that. So, it's quite exploitative, as in,
Mhm.
they have to kind of outsource a lot of this work to countries where the wages are lower and the working conditions are not that great. But that also means that you have people who are tagging all this stuff where English might not be their first language. So you don't always know whether it's right or not. So there are tools for that. And then on the other side, that's usually tagged if you're searching under AI explainability. It's one of the tenets of responsible AI is that you should be able to explain what your AI is doing. So those are kind of things you can search for. Is AI explainability in the second case, and in the first case, there's actually it goes back much further than AI, but obviously AI has helped a lot in searching through data for bias. You can look for data bias, and that's usually where you'll find those topics. And it changes all the time because, as you know, um, ChatGPT or GPT-5, whatever number it is now, only came out what, 2, 3 years ago.
Right.
So, it's so fast paced and so fast moving that you're worth looking at the latest research. There's a couple of people that I recommend looking through. Bebe Birani, I believe is her name. She's over, I think, at the University in Dublin, Trinity University in Dublin. She does a lot of work. And there's another person, I think it's the AI Justice League. They've been doing quite a
Hmm.
lot of work on AI justice, including looking at how black skin isn't recognized by a lot of medical devices, which led to a lot of problems during COVID. There's a lot of interesting work out there to look at, and then obviously read Invisible Women, because that talks about, again, remember, it's the data that drives the AI. Bad data, bad AI. So it's worth going back and reading things like Invisible Women. There's also a really good book by a guy that I'm very fond of. And he's written a great book on gender data. I can't remember. His name's Kevin, and I can't remember his last name, which I feel terrible
His
about.
his last name is Guyon because we've had him as a guest. He's
Ah,
fantastic.
I met him not that long
Yeah.
ago at
Yeah.
Edinburgh.
Yep. Yep.
So I was really, really pleased to finally meet him. I've got both his books
Hmm.
on my shelf. But those are all
Hmm.
kind of really great books, resources to start with, and they'll give you an exploration of data from other lenses as well. Any
Great
other?
suggestions. Thank you so much. Anybody want to turn their mic on? Ask a question? I know you want to be brave. This is valuable moment. Well, while you think about it, I want to know your perspective on something that's kind of philosophical, kind of where you started with like, what is data? And I really found it so helpful that you talked about data is anything I can record because I've just come from Indigenous Data Alliance conference where we spent almost 3 days talking about this because the kind of question was posed, if if an indigenous person and a white person are walking side by side and somebody else records the number of steps they're taking, is some of that data indigenous and some of that data not indigenous? And the question wasn't really asked from a philosophical point of view, but from a like, we're in the process of building rules that our governments have to follow if the data has anything to do with an indigenous person. And that really helped me understand how important the indigenous sovereignty questions are. And I was just wondering what you think of that.
I think that one of the problems with categorizing data is that everyone has a different lens, and it makes sense, right? Everyone is going to have a different lens because data is so reflective of us, of our culture, because
Yeah.
data essentially is meaningless without context, and context is a
Yeah.
human cognition. And human cognition
Mm,
changes all the time, right? So
yeah.
that is why you find so many discrepancies. And it's not something that we will ever fix and just have that's it. It's always a movable feast. But I like to operate under guiding principles because I think that that helps with thinking about these movable feasts. And one of those guiding principles is no data about us without us. And that's one of the mottos we use at Data Tech and Black Communities because what we found was that a lot of organizations, very
Yeah.
well meaning large funders, were funding very extractive practices.
Hmm.
So the one that really kind of got me going was during COVID, there was a study on why racial minorities have vaccine reluctance.
Yeah.
But the people doing the study were from a middle class, white,
Yeah.
And I just thought, I don't care if you give me a £50 Amazon voucher. I'm furious about this, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I'm going to use this to make decisions on funding those communities,
yeah,
but the work is being done by someone else. The knowledge and skills are not being reinvested into those communities, meaning that you're extracting more than you're giving back.
yeah,
Because really, what you should be funding is those communities to be helping themselves. So
yeah,
you can tell I'm still not happy about this. So that was the whole thing about data protecting Black communities was me and two friends all ranting about this and going, maybe we should do something about it rather than just ranting in our pajamas, right? Because it was COVID, so you could just be like working from home. So I think that it's important. We're
yeah,
not going to have an easy fixed answer, but data is personal. And if you're going to collect data about me, then I should get a say in how that data is used.
yeah,
That's it. That's where I would start from. And
yeah,
then there may be other considerations to take into account depending on where you are jurisdictionally, but that's
yeah.
always my starting point.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. We have somebody with their hand up. Hey, William, welcome.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much, Dr. Onerhime.
I'm actually not a doctor yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm still doing my PhD. I'm not yet, but
Well, you are to me.
Oh, thank
So
you.
thank
Me
you.
too. She has a we all count honorary doctorate.
Um, Indeed. Thank you so much. Just extraordinarily thought-provoking material and heads kind of spinning at the moment with potential questions. But I am my question that I can think of is about how to um, remember the people connection, the personal connection to data about environmental health measurements, not people health measurements, but I'm in the business of measuring the health of the environment. It's, water and streams and watersheds and so forth. And um, I find it is easy to default to this is very impersonal. This is just about measuring chemical and
Yeah.
physical processes of the earth. And yet kind of divorce yourself and almost excuse yourself from, well, I don't need to worry about this, the sort of personal effect on people because I'm not measuring people.
Yeah.
But so I guess my question is thoughts, advice, counsel on how to make sure that we don't let ourselves get complacent about the effects of the data that we are collecting on humans, on people. Yeah.
So as you started saying that, I remembered doing something similar, thinking about something similar, and defaulting to oral storytelling because I come from an oral storytelling background. I'm a Robo from Nigeria, and oral storytelling is still kind of the main way that lessons are shared. You learn things through stories. I've always been fascinated by stories, so it helps. And one way is to include stories in your researching and people's experiences. When I say stories, I mean people's experiences, how they've experienced those environments as part of your research. So remember, the data is not just numbers, can be qualitative if you want to be academic about it. Qualitative data also counts, and that means you can't quantify it as numbers, but the whole point is that the quantitative part tells us something is happening, it's a signal. The qualitative part is how we understand and contextualize the numbers, right? So we've got the numbers. What is the story? Does that mean? Like when I say to you, it's 20 degrees, that can mean I'm hot, right? I'm centigrade here. I don't know Fahrenheit. I can't work Fahrenheit out. Although, interestingly, if we use Fahrenheit when it's really hot here, it's a very weird system. But if I say it's -5, I'm going to be cold, right? And the context to me is wear a coat. So for me, there's like stories around that. In fact, let me tell you one last one, but I'll tell you a little story that I wasn't going to tell. I was actually thinking about telling this as part of my talk, but then I thought, that might be a bit much. And please ignore my cat. He's furious that he's eating his dinner. I'm not here for a couple. So I live in a tiny village in Scotland, and usually the biggest story is something happened to the swans. Right? The swans have moved. Swan Gate. Or there was a time a bus drove into someone's house, like the biggest news story of the year. Now this year we had an even bigger story because we have these things called SUDs, which are suburban something, I don't know the technical term, because we're on an old munitions site. We're built on a munitions site, and these things are like depressions, so that if we flood, it drains into them, right? Really interesting. And that's where the swans live. So what they've done is they've made those little pockets of environmental loveliness, and swans live there. And everyone loves our swans, big swan thing in this village. And then sewage was released into the suds, and it was killing off plants, it was killing off algae, it was killing off the wildlife, disrupting the ecosystem, right? Which meant for us, big cleanup operation. So the data collected will be one single data point that was one release by the water company into the suds by mistake. By mistake. Maybe it was true. I don't know. But the impact on us as a community was immense because it killed off a lot of the wildlife. The swans had nothing to eat. It's like there's a story behind that. People start to get worried. Is that going to seep into the water? Right? Is that going to make our children sick? Those are then the stories that you want to add. I mean, mine's not like massive. I didn't want to do something really upsetting to anyone. I have other stories, but I'm not going to share those on this call. But that's, for me, is the story behind the data point. The data point says there was a release into the suds by mistake. The story was the impact on our lives, the impact on our community, the impact on essentially just the ability to live in this community. We already have a lot of restrictions. We're not allowed to grow food because munitions factory. So to even have this on top of that is very frustrating. And people were really furious. This was not, well, people are not letting this go, right? So I'm just trying to say, add the stories, add the qualitative data, and that way you don't forget the people that are impacted by even something like a single data point.
Fabulous story and great question. It's so good to see you both. And Edafe, thank you so much for joining us today. It really has meant the world to me. This has been beyond my wildest expectations, and my expectations were very high after getting to know you. And let us know. I hope you can see there's lots and lots of hearts and happiness all over the screen. So if you ever wonder if the talk went well, the talk went amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
let us know when your book is out, and let us know when you want to come and talk to us about Terry and
All
have
right.
a great Friday evening. And everyone else, there would be no Talking Data Equity without you. You're the reason that Talking Data Equity exists. You're my community. Each and every one of you means so much to me, and take really good care of yourselves and each other over the weekend.
Thank you all so much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.